Work underground held many dangers: roof falls, lethal gas explosions, accidents with machinery, flooding. But there was one peril that brought a chill to the heart of even the bravest miner: the rats. There were countless thousands of them everywhere in all coal mines, bringing the filth and the dangers of all vermin, and also carrying Weil's disease, a serious illness which claimed many lives. But strangely, the rats could also be friends to the colliers. In the days of timber roof supports, and with a constant possibility of collapse, the rats provided a sort of early warning system. They seemed to know when there was likely to be a roof fall, and they'd scream and scurry, letting the miners know that they needed to get out of the area. Clearly, rats can hear sounds and sensations which humans can't.
Oh, the rats were a friend to the collier. When we were working in the face, now every 3 months we'd have a weight coming on the face. And this particular time now we knew the rats squealing in the gob. That's the waste, what we call the gob, we used to call it. And you think to yourself, well, it's you got to go, it's time for us to go. So in the end, he was a little friend, he was a friend of us in a way, but we never liked him anyhow.
There was a constant battle between the miners and the rats over the food that the men took to their work, their snap, as they called it. It was never safe.
We used to take our food wrapped up in newspaper, and perhaps when it was food time for you, you'd go to get your food and then find a rat in your pocket. And they'd just nibble a little hole in the paper and they'd eat all the food out of there without showing us it was eaten.
Well, the biggest ever I seen, well, it was like a cat, or like that. You know, they used to go off the horse's feet in those days, like. And you'd have them squealing around you, of course.
Some fellas, they didn't used to mind the rats, and if they had a bit of time to spare, they'd tie a bit of wire on the rat's tail and then put it on the moving belts. An old rat would be running up and down, pulling it back, run away again with the belt. They spend quite a bit of time doing that. I couldn't handle them myself.
The Second World War brought a variety of experiences to Blaenafon. Most of the miners were not allowed to enlist in the forces because coal production was vital to the industries producing for the war effort, and of course to the Merchant Navy and the Royal Navy. The mining industry had production targets to reach, and extra miners were drafted in from other parts of Britain. They were called Bevin Boys, named after Ernest Bevin, the Minister of Labour, who introduced the compulsory scheme. Young men from all walks of life, some from English public schools, found themselves in the unfamiliar surroundings of the coal mines. The boys were chosen by lot. If your number came out of the hat, you went to the coal mines. If it didn't, you went to one of the armed forces. When the boys arrived in the coal fields, they were given some training and then spent some time on the screens sifting the lump coal. This was known as the madhouse because of the noise and dust. They were then allowed to work on pit bottom or along the haulage roads. Relatively few eventually got to do the skilled and very heavy work at the coal face. Many of the Bevin boys had never done any manual labor in their lives, and yet they found themselves conscripted into one of the toughest industries in the world. It's been described by historians as the biggest social shake-up in British history. Many conscripts made it clear that they didn't accept their enforced entry into the mines with good grace. They considered themselves to be the forgotten army, and many didn't stick it in the mines. Absenteeism was widespread, and desertion was not unknown. Many of the Bevin boys eventually managed to get themselves into the army, the navy, or the air force. They preferred the risks of battle to the conditions in coal mining.
Well, there was quite a few Bevin boys, yeah, who came here. During the war, there were a lot of things you had to do besides work in the pit. There was, you had to either join the Home Guard, or the boys had to join the ADC, or the fire watching. And perhaps sometimes you won't get home if the siren went. Until that all clear went, perhaps you won't get home till 4:30 sometimes in the morning. But he still had to go to work that day. It was a war effort, and everybody was dedicated to that war effort, and that was it.
Bevin boys were given no shovels or picks. They were expected to buy their own, just as the miners did. Some of the men from the coal mining community did manage to enlist, and they got to see some of wartime life and death outside Blaenafon.
Another time, the bomb dropped up where up in the mountain, yes, somewhere, and the bomb dropped, see? And of course my father was about, look, and he wasn't him. He dropped, and he heard him, and he ran through the front door to the washing, and there was a warden coming by. He said, the warden, for Christ's sake, come on, he said, there's one dropped in our back garden.
World War II certainly shook up Blaenafon, as it did many other places. In the years following the end of the Second World War in 1945, the coal industry, like several other major industries and services, was nationalized by the newly elected Labour government. This meant that from 1947, the coal industry was publicly owned, and the days of the private coal owners were over. Coal was Britain's main fuel. Demand was high, reserves were plentiful, and the future for the industry looked secure. Nationalization brought great changes to the industry. Working and safety conditions improved, pay increased, charges for the showers and for explosives and tools ended. New investment brought an increase in mechanized production.
Well, the benefit of the nationalisation brought a decent minimum wage to the workers. They also brought more money into the collieries, where they had new types of machinery which made the life for the colliers a lot easier. You also had what they call the steel props coming in rather than timber.
You know, before nationalisation, you could smoke halfway down the pit, you know, or down the slope. But they stopped all that, like, you know.
Mining got a bit easier, as far as we were concerned. The people that we had to deal with seemed to have more sympathy and more understanding as far as the miner was concerned. And it was a bit easier to negotiate on behalf of the workmen some little problem or some little thing that made their life a little bit better.
And instead of timber then, they started to bring these hydraulic props in, which you could pump, you use a pump like that and pump them up the roof and that, and then they started to bring these big chocks in and that, and everything then was got automated then, what they call. You just had to pull a little handle like that and your conveyor would go over, your top of your chocks would go up again the roof like that, and instead of say having about 20 to 24 men on a face or perhaps more, they ended up with about 5. That's all.
The graph shows what really happened to the industry. The dotted line shows the predictions made in 1950 and 1955. The solid line marks the true story of decline. Coal lost its supremacy as the leading fuel due to the rise in the use of oil, which came to dominate the shipping and rail markets in the late 1950s. Nuclear power grew in importance in the 1960s, and then natural gas came to replace coal gas in the 1970s. Despite these changes, many recognized that coal was still a vital source of energy. That view of the future was not accepted by the government of the day, however, and the rundown of the industry continued. By the mid-1950s, pits were beginning to close, and there was a great fear that the mass unemployment of the 1930s would come back again. Instead of that, however, newer industries, particularly in engineering, manufacturing and services, expanded in South Wales and other mining areas, partly assisted by funds from the national government and the European community. The social changes in the mining valleys were, however, huge. With the manual industries of coal and steel receding, women's employment increasing, and travel to work over much longer distances, the South Wales coalfield was altering almost beyond recognition. The miners contributed to the life of the South Wales community in many ways. More than any other group of workers, they became organized in order to improve general welfare, raise living standards, and achieve opportunities for better education and health care. Miners' contributions bought the first ambulance for the Blaenafon area. Not that we'd recognize it as an ambulance today.
Well, then the way that we used to take it to the hospital was that a trolley thing would be waiting on top of the pit. The man would be placed in the trolley thing and he would be taken to the hospital.
Blaenafon Hospital was built and equipped through the subscriptions of the miners, and when the National Health Service was established by the Labour government in 1948, it continued to serve the area. Before the days of the National Health Service, the people of Blaenafon endured some appalling treatment from doctors, many of whom were on the payroll of the colliery owners.
He frightened me to death, and I was only sat outside. I said, I ain't getting in there. So out he came there with his chart right, he said, who's next?
We were very fortunate, especially in the pit on the Keyslope and Gondrift, that we had what was known as a medical society of our own, which meant that the workmen would pay 3pence a week out of their wages, and for that we had all the treatment we required from the doctors, all the visits that he had to make, and all the descriptions as well. That was something which we appreciated very much.